My name is Audrey, and at 28 I honestly believed I had buried the girl who used to breathe in 8-bar phrases and exhale arpeggios. I thought I had shoveled dirt over the prodigy label and the cracked metronome memories and the way my mother said, again like a verdict. I was wrong. The day my sister Cassandra's wedding plans hit full throttle, my mother smiled with that elegant, airless smile and said, Audrey will provide some background music during cocktail hour. Not a question. Not a request. A line item written in ink. She didn't know she had just set the stage for the last time she would ever be able to call me background. Before I tell you how the neatest plan my mother ever made came apart at the seams, because of a single piece I wasn't supposed to play, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever been underestimated by the person who should have protected you, hit like and subscribe now so you don't miss the part where quiet turns into thunder. The very first time I touched a piano I was 4 and the world went quiet in the room and loud in my chest. There is no other way to describe it. The keys were not keys so much as a map I had always known how to read. By 6, my small hands could climb through preludes most adults still filed under, someday. My mother, Judith, had been a capable pianist in her youth, a fact she wore like a perfume no one else could smell until she mentioned it. Marriage and mortgages and 2 daughters diverted her path. When she recognized my gift, her eyes lit with a light I mistook for love. This one has it, she told our church ladies and the grocery store clerk and the mailman who had not asked. Audrey is going to be the concert pianist we always knew we needed in this family. Though we was doing a lot of heavy lifting. Childhood in our house was measured in ticks of a timer. 4 hours a day on the bench, even on Christmas, even when fever blurred middle C. The wooden ruler was not for punishment, my mother said, just feedback. A tap to the wrist when my pinkies got lazy, a click against the lid when a phrase drooped. Cassandra, 3 years older, floated across the surface of our home like a swan on practiced water. She was the darling every brochure promised. Pretty, poised, organized, varsity volleyball and student government, and the kind of laugh adults call a breath of fresh air. When I was 10, I overheard a neighbor say, Cassandra will rule a boardroom one day, and my mother smiled like it was a prophecy she had paid to have written. Why can't you be more like your sister? Became the rhythm of my childhood. Cassandra knows how to present herself. Cassandra doesn't forget to smile. My father, George, practiced corporate law and absence with equal discipline. When the ruler clicked too sharply, he might furrow his brow on his way past the doorway, but his mouth always remembered the script. Listen to your mother, Audrey. Then the door to his study would swallow him and the metronome would go on. At 16 I qualified for the National Young Pianist Competition, the tournament my mother had circled in her calendar since I was 10. The month before it was a state of emergency. 6 hours of practice daily, metronome set to no excuses, a restricted diet more appropriate for a weigh-in than a recital, and social contact limited to brief conversations with Chopin and scales. This is your moment, my mother said, drawing a breath like she was about to dive. This is what we've sacrificed everything for. She meant what she had sacrificed. I carried that sentence into the auditorium like a stone. The lights were surgical. The judges were still as furniture. My mother's face in the front row was lit with hunger. I lifted my hands for Rachmaninoff's Third, and suddenly my fingers belonged to a girl who had never met a keyboard in her life. The first page staggered out of me like it had been drinking. The second tried to hold on. Then halfway through the bottom fell out. I stopped. Not a retardando, not a brave regroup. I literally stopped. Silence sat on the stage with me and the piano and the 1,000 versions of myself I had been training to be. I stood, bowed, walked off. In the car afterward my mother didn't speak until the house was shut and her coat hung just so. Then to the quiet hallway she said, I have wasted 12 years of my life on you. It was an efficient sentence. Did its job. That night I decided the instrument had cost me enough. I would finish high school, enroll in a practical major, and quit music before it could quit me again. I did what practical girls do. State University, accounting degree, a job at a competent firm with beige walls and software that never stopped updating. I rented an apartment 30 minutes from my parents and taught myself how to be the kind of daughter you can ignore without consequence. My mother congratulated Cassandra on promotions at a sleek marketing firm, on dating and then getting engaged to Richard. Yes, that Richard, son of the founder, the kind of pedigree that comes with a zip code carved into the ring. She congratulated me by not bringing up the competition anymore, which I suppose was a kind of mercy. She called my career fine. The way people call weather fine, when it ruins no one's plans and makes no one's day. I lied by omission. In the spare bedroom, under coats I never wore, sat a digital piano with good weighted keys and a pair of headphones that kept my life from being anyone's business. On nights when the office spreadsheets blurred and the memory of a ruler stung a wrist phantom style, I'd plug in and let my hands remember the part of me my life had politely smothered. Sometimes I would start with a scale and end 3 hours later with a room full of ghosts finally satisfied enough to go home. I never told anyone. A secret is heavier when you carry it alone, but the weight reminded me I still had a spine. Cassandra's engagement hit my family like a parade. My mother planned as if the wedding were a royal broadcast and we were a country with ratings on the line. Guest lists ballooned from close friends and family to people who know people who will be impressed. Seat charts were battle plans. There was talk of a minor European royal adjacency and a seafood tower tall enough to obstruct conversation. "Can you imagine?" my mother said to anyone she had ever taken a phone call from. "Cassandra will live on Westbrook Hill. The Hamiltons. We have always been destined for this family." Richard's mother, Patricia, appeared in a haze of tasteful jewelry and controlled warmth. Everything about her said old money with good taste. A whisper, not a shout. At a formal family dinner, my mother organized to finalize details. Florals to match Cassandra's palette, place cards written by a calligrapher whose Instagram attracted actual duchesses. She unspooled her next decree. "We've secured the symphony quartet for the ceremony," she said, consulting her binder thick enough to merit a spine. "And for cocktail hour," she turned to me and smiled, "Audrey will provide piano." The bite of cake in my mouth turned into chalk. "Excuse me," I said because syllables were easier than sentences. "You'll play," she repeated, not looking at me so much as at the box where I had always belonged. "It's a personal touch and it saves the cost of additional musicians." Richard looked politely interested. Patricia looked curious. My father looked at the dessert fork as if it had information. Cassandra looked almost, was it concern? And then it was gone. "Mom, I haven't performed in a decade," I said carefully, the way you talk to someone holding a sharp object. "It's not a good idea." "Nonsense," she said, flicking a hand like brushing lint from silk. "It's like riding a bicycle. Besides, it's just background music." The words did what they were designed to do. They reminded me of the corner I had once inhabited and the box she preferred I never leave. "I didn't even know you played," Richard said, turning to me with harmless curiosity. Before I could shape an answer, my mother shaped it for me. "Audrey was quite good as a child. She had potential." Past tense is a neat trick. It erases the person and preserves the story. "I can't," I said, finding a spine under my dress. "I'd embarrass everyone." My mother's expression cooled from room temperature to marble. "After everything we invested, the professor, the competitions, the tuition, you can't manage an hour for your sister?" The room went still in that shallow way where everyone pretends they are not hearing a thing. "Judith," my father ventured, draping a napkin over guilt, "if Audrey doesn't want to, it's fine," Cassandra said, which meant it was not. "We can hire someone." "No," my mother cut in fast. "Everyone is contributing. I am planning, your father is paying, the least Audrey can do is 1 hour." She softened into the expression that has backed me into more corners than any ruler ever did. "Unless it's still too difficult after what happened." She left the noun unsaid. He didn't have to. She dangled my most fragile moment like a keychain and waited. Refusing would certify my failure. Accepting would confirm my place. You can be righteous or you can be safe. When you are the daughter of Judith, you rarely get both. "Fine," I said, and the words sat between us like a signature. "I'll play." "Wonderful," my mother said, triumphant without raising her voice. "I'll send a list of appropriate selections. Nothing too showy. Just pleasant ambience." "Yes," I said. "Just background." If you have ever been reduced to ambience, you know the rage that arrives when no one is looking. It kept me awake that night and drove me the next morning to drag the digital piano out from under winter coats and into my living room where the light could find it. I stared at the keys like you stare at a door you once fled through. Then I sat, put my fingers on the warm from sun plastic and did the bravest thing. A C major scale. It didn't just come back. It came back like it had been waiting politely in the hall, listening for my footsteps. By the end of the afternoon I had gone from scales to phrases to Debussy, And I had cried exactly twice, once for the lost girl and once for the one who'd found the courage to come back. 2 days later an email arrived. Appropriate wedding selections. The PDF was a graveyard of taste. Elevator arrangements of pop songs that had the life washed out of them. Simplified classical edits designed not to alarm wealthy donors. Items labeled tasteful and unobtrusive. At the bottom, a note in my mother's hand. Remember, this is Cassandra's day. Keep the music pleasant and in the background. I closed the file and placed it under a coffee mug without meaning to. Then I opened a notebook and listed pieces I loved, not because they were safe but because they were honest. Chopin nocturnes, yes, but with the breath real, not ironed flat. Beethoven, where the dynamic marks feel like weather. Even the Ghost of Rachmaninoff, not the concerto that had crushed me, but the lyric pieces that knew how to grieve and to shine. I practiced. The rust flaked. The weeks had a shape again that wasn't dictated by someone else's binder. One night, my fingers stopped on a phrase and refused to move forward. It wasn't a failure, it was a question. What would happen if I didn't play the list at all? What if I gave them meaning everyone and also precisely my mother? Not a selection but a story. Not a medley. Not a stunt. Something that didn't exist until I wrote it. The arc of a girl taught to be perfect, broken by it and rebuilt. I had not composed since my teens because it was easier to play ghosts than to risk hearing your own voice. But that night I found a melody like a thread on the floor and followed it. It began simple, the way childhood always looks from far away. A handful of notes testing their weight. Then harmony and friction, the sound of a timer clicking, the ruler against wood, the open window afternoons I watched from a bench. I built measures the way you build courage. One bar at a time, returning to what you already shaped and asking it to be truer. I ended hours later with a page that said more than I had said at any dinner in a decade. I called Emma. Emma is the friend you call when you need someone to hold your ribs in place while you laugh or cry too hard. We met at summer program years ago, back when music still felt like a room with friendly windows. My mother volunteered me for cocktail hour, I said. I know, she said. Cassandra texted. How are you? I'm thinking about burning the list. I'll bring the matches, she said. When I explained the composition, she went quiet in the way people do when they're setting down every other thought. It's brave, she said finally, and it's necessary. You're not 16. You're not playing for judges. You're not playing for Judith. You're playing for the part of you that still wants to breathe. If you're going to tell your story, don't whisper it. What if I freeze? I said, because some questions are muscle memory. What if you don't, she said. And if you do, what if you forgive yourself in real time and keep going? She had always been an excellent pianist and an even better human. Also, she added, if you need me to stand by the power strip and trip it if your mother tries anything, I have long sleeves. The writing became its own rehearsal. I worked a full day at the firm, smiled at people who believed a pivot table could save a life, came home, put on sweatpants and truth and composed until midnight. The piece took the shape my life had. It opened with innocence, climbed into pressure, splintered under it, then rebuilt from fragments into something not perfect but alive. I titled it Return because coming back to yourself deserves its own word. While I wrote, my mother texted periodically with polite surveillance. Practicing? Yes. Sticking to the list? I'm sticking to something. She sent me a second email labeled Tasteful Reminders, and I did not open it. 3 days before the wedding I played Return start to finish without stopping and realized my face was wet halfway through the second movement, and I did not apologize to the room. The apartment listened differently that night. Even the refrigerator was quiet. When the last chord dissolved, I sat very still because moving felt like lying. I knew 2 things as clearly as I have known anything. I would play this piece at the wedding, and whatever came of it would belong to me. Westbrook Gardens was the kind of venue my mother believed vindicated her taste. Manicured lawn rolling down to a mirror lake, a historic mansion whose staircases had opinions, a glass terrace that made the sky part of the party. The morning of the wedding felt like a tech rehearsal for a Broadway run. Florists, caterers, coordinators murmuring into headsets, the string quartet from the symphony sight reading their way through compliments. I checked in at the bridal suite because I am, if nothing else, a woman who follows instructions when they won't cost her a life. My mother opened the door looking like a mood board, champagne silk and a face expertly painted into effortless. You're late, she said by way of good morning. I checked my watch. The email said 9:30. It's 9:25. She waved it away. Come, you need to see your corner. Cassandra, in a satin robe, caught my eye in the mirror and smiled in a way I recognized from when we still shared secrets. Hey, she said. You made it. Wouldn't miss it, I said, and for once I meant the part where I was coming for me. The glass terrace was the kind of room that makes a musician thirsty. Light like water, acoustics you can test with your breath. In the far corner, half hidden by an arch of hydrangeas the size of planets, sat a Steinway baby grand. There, my mother said, pleased. Perfect. Music should enhance the atmosphere, not dominate. I lifted the lid. It was well maintained, warm under my palms, responsive like an old friend who forgives your silence. Can we move it? I asked, because sometimes you test the fence just to hear it hum. No, she said. We're not staging a concert, Audrey. It's ambience. She was halfway to the florist before the last syllable landed. I played a few measures soft from the middle of return, and the glass did the thing I hoped it would. It held the sound a second longer, like handing it back. Patricia, hair silver and impeccably brave, wandered over and listened with her whole face. Not the usual wedding fare, she said. Beautiful. Just warming up, I said. My mother reappeared as if conjured by the phrase. What was that? Warming up, I repeated. Suspicion flashed across the part of her features not currently assigned to charm, but a staffer needed her to approve a ribbon shade urgently. I drifted to the ceremony space and watched the quartet rehearse. They were clean and correct, the kind of players who could make Bach feel like a freshly pressed shirt. The first violinist recognized me. You're the sister? She asked. The pianist? So they tell me, I said. Your mother said you'd keep it easy, she added, friendly, not unkind. Easy tasted like tin in my mouth. I'll keep it beautiful, I said instead. That works, she said and smiled. Back at the suite, Cassandra's hair was all soft architecture. You look like you, I told her, which is the best you can say to a bride. She rolled her eyes at me in a way that felt like home. Mom hid you behind a flower wall, didn't she? It's fine, I said. The piano is good. I wanted you for the ceremony, she said quietly. She had the quartet contracted before I could ask. I looked at my sister and saw, for a second, not the emblem of perfection but a woman also managed. You were always the musical one, she added. You were always the perfect one, I answered before I could add a filter. She laughed and then didn't. Perfect is a costume, she said. I'm tired of it. A knock, 15 minutes. Cassandra squeezed my fingers. Play something real, she said. Please. I will, I said, and when I walked out I felt my heart stand up. The ceremony was a postcard. Vows that made strangers cry, sunlight that had obviously been hired. The quartet did their job flawlessly, which is to say they were heard without being noticed. As people migrated to the terrace for cocktail hour, my mother found me, straightened a collar that didn't need straightening, and said, Remember, nothing complicated. People will be talking. Just atmosphere. Understood, I said, and she must have heard something in my voice because she added, When you're done, the quartet will take dinner. Thank you for contributing. Of course, I said, and my hands were already humming. I sat. I placed return on the stand even though I knew it by nerve. I began with a Chopin nocturne, something so gentle you could mistake it for air. I did not look up. I did not look for approval. I let my muscles remember what honesty feels like when no one is watching. 15 minutes in, while the servers floated and the laughter peaked, I shifted. The first notes of return are a quiet argument with the past, single tones spaced like questions. They do not announce themselves. They arrive. I played them the way I wrote them, careful but sure. The glass held me, the piano took my side. A few conversations thinned without anyone deciding to stop speaking. Then the melody climbed. Harmony slid under it. The left hand began to say what the right hand didn't know how to yet. I heard it before I saw it. The room's pitch changed. People turned without noticing themselves turning. A circle opened around the corner where I had been placed to be forgotten. If you've ever had someone label you background, you know what comes next. The part where you stop apologizing for volume. The part where the thing you love stops pretending it is harmless. I let the second movement do what it was written for. Turbulence without apology. Arpeggios like weather. Dissonance that doesn't ask permission to exist. In the corner of my periphery, I saw a waiter sprint and recognized the gate of a message being ferried to my mother. I didn't slow. The breakdown arrived. Phrases fractured on purpose, silence used as a sentence. My hands shook and then steadied and then remembered they were mine. The room went quiet in that deep way that feels like the audience has leaned forward without moving. When I glanced up, I saw Cassandra at the edge of the crowd gripping Richard's arm, not out of shock but out of recognition. I saw my father standing taller than I'd ever seen him, as if someone had removed a weight he'd forgotten he was carrying. I saw Patricia with tears she would later deny. I saw my mother pushing through people who had ceased to be scenery to her. She reached the edge of the circle and our eyes met, and for the first time in years, she did not have a sentence ready. The last movement is not triumph, it is clarity. The child melody returns, but it has learned something and it refuses to be what it was asked to be. It is warm without being sweet, resolute without being loud. I played it like a door opening onto a room I had built myself. When the final chord settled and then released, the terrace stayed silent one breath longer, and then the applause started in one corner and like weather took the whole room. People who had been trained to network instead stepped closer. A woman in navy said thank you like she meant it. A man in a suit pressed a business card into my palm. Someone said the phrase, gallery opening, and the words we pay, and I smiled with my face and saved my heart for later. Cassandra appeared first, fast, and hugged me the way you hug someone you have just seen arrive at last. You were, oh my God, Audrey, she said, laughing and crying at the same time. I'm sorry if, I began because contrition is a habit. Stop, she said, squeezing my hands. That was the most honest part of today. Richard nodded. Patricia said the board of her arts foundation was always looking for real, and asked if I had a card. I almost told her I had Excel instead. My mother came last. Wasn't that lovely? She said to the air, not to me. Her smile was sculpted. Her eyes were steel. The coordinator needs you to wrap up. The quartet will take dinner. Actually, Patricia said, materializing like an ally, I'd love to hear more during the salad course. The quartet can rest. Richard agreed. It is Cassandra's day, my sister said, stepping neatly into the space. I'd like that too. For a heartbeat, my mother looked like someone had rewritten the program in a language she didn't speak. Then she remembered her audience. Of course, dear, she said, and it cost her a lot. If this story has you breathing easier because someone finally broke the script, tap like so the algorithm doesn't file this under background. And if you know the feeling of being told to be tasteful and unobtrusive, subscribe, because the part where ambience turns into an anthem is exactly what we're doing next. I did not move the piano, they moved the people. The quartet adjusted like professionals. The coordinator whispered to the sound tech. My mother managed not to combust. I rested my fingers on the warm black and white and thought of the first time a scale had felt like home. I thought about Emma volunteering to trip a power strip. I thought about the 16-year-old who had walked off a stage and heard the click of a verdict behind her. I thought about return and how it had taught me to be new without needing to be perfect. And then, while servers balanced plates and conversation picked back up like a timid bird returning to a branch, I laid both hands on the keys and played the first notes again, this time not as overture but as declaration. I didn't rush them. I let each tone bloom and fade like it had the right to take up space because it did, because I did. The room adjusted around the sound. A laugh stalled, a fork hovered, a sentence decided it could wait, and the terrace's glass softened it all into a single body of listening. If cocktail hour had been the awakening, dinner was the reckoning. Return unfurled differently now, not as surprise but as a story people already suspected they needed to hear. The first movement threaded itself through the clink of glass and the whisper of napkins. It wasn't loud, just undeniable. When the second movement began to darken and swell, a few heads tilted the way you tilt your head toward good weather, and conversations recalibrated to the tempo I set. I could feel in the tiny muscles of my hands the old impulse to apologize for gravity. I didn't. I gave the chord its full weight and watched, in my peripheral vision, the wedding planner lay a gentle hand on the sound tech's forearm when he reached toward the fader like a reflex. She mouthed, "Leave it," and for that small act of courage alone, I fell a little in love with the night. Halfway through, a server attempting heroic multitasking, 2 plates, 3 requests, 1 tray, caught my eye and gave the smallest nod, the kind you exchange with strangers when you've both agreed something matters. The quartet had taken up a position near the French doors. instruments in their laps, listening like colleagues rather than competition. Patricia sat straighter than she had all day. Richard's hand rested on Cassandra's chair the way anchors rest on the sea floor. My father across the room wasn't pretending not to cry. My mother stood like a sentence that ends in a period but wants to be an exclamation point. I could feel her calculation. How many minutes until she could steer, how many faces to read, how many narratives to salvage. She made a small pivot toward the sound tech again, and the planner's hand returned, palm up this time, a please and a boundary in one. The room belonged to the music now, which meant it belonged to me in a way I'd never allowed. A strange, steady warmth moved through me, not adrenaline but clarity. I did not check my mother's face again. Return's last movement, the part that rebuilds, arrived without drumroll, and it did what it always does inside my chest. It let air in. I carried the final cadence like a lantern into silence and set it down gently. The applause was softer this time than during cocktail hour, but it spread further, like heat instead of flame. Tables that had never said my name said it now. Someone at table 9. Later I'd learn he owned a small performance space that smelled like wood and honest sweat. Lifted a glass toward me in a toast I returned with a nod and a hand to my heart. I could have stopped there and it would have been enough. But the room wanted one more piece, and for the first time since I was a child, I answered want with generosity instead of fear. I offered them a nocturne, not Chopin's but mine, newly born, a variation spun out of Return's middle section, a lullaby for people who had learned to be loud. It landed like a well-placed truth. The next hour passed in the elastic way time passes when it's finally being used correctly. I ate 3 bites of salad backstage and was hugged by 2 strangers in the hallway who apologized for hugging me while continuing to do it. The first violinist squeezed my shoulder and murmured, "Well done," in a voice that understood more than she said. The coordinator, who had moved through the day like a human zipper keeping everything from splitting open, tucked a business card into my palm with the conspiratorial smile of a fellow woman who has spent years being told to be useful and quiet and has quietly refused. I found Cassandra by the bar where someone had finally given her water. "What you did," she said, shaking her head, "was the only part of today that felt like us." It landed in me with a shock. Us, not me. "I'm sorry if it stole," I started. She interrupted with a wave. She said. "It gave me permission to breathe in this dress." She laughed, then sobered. "Do you remember when we were kids and I used to sneak into the room and lie under the piano while you practiced? I could feel the notes in my ribs. It felt like that again, except this time it didn't make me jealous. It made me proud." She kissed my cheek and was gone, pulled toward a cousin, a camera, a timeline. But I kept the word proud like a stone I could warm in my pocket. When dessert arrived, attention shifted in the room the way a school of fish turns all at once. My mother took the opportunity to do what she does best: circulate with purpose, touch 3 shoulders in 30 seconds, accept compliments and redirect them toward the floral arches engineering. I watched her watch me from across the cake table as if I were an experiment someone had run in her home without her permission. When she chose a moment, between cutting the cake and the DJ inviting guests to the floor, she crossed to me with a smile that had lived on her face so long it had become habitually dishonest. "What exactly was that?" she asked under breath that smelled like champagne and self-control. Up close, her eyes were more tired than angry, which made the question heavier. "I played the piano," I said, because a truthful answer can be a shield. "At your request." Her laugh was small and without joy. "Don't be clever, Audrey. You turned cocktail hour into a recital and dinner into whatever this was. You knew what I asked for. Pleasant background." "I did hear you," I said, steady. "But I decided to introduce everyone to the part of me you keep forgetting exists." She blinked. Something crossed her features that wasn't fury. Might have been fear. "This is your sister's day," she said, returning to the argument she traditionally wins. "Everything you did pulled focus." "Everything I did returned it," I said quietly. "Not to me. To the thing that matters." "Which is?" she demanded. "Being real for once," I said. "In a room where everyone has been pretending all day." The instant before she replied, a small hand closed around my wrist. A flower girl with a chocolate mustache peered up at me. "My piano teacher says grown-ups forget how to play," she announced solemnly. "You didn't forget." "Thank you," I said, and it came out rough, like a laugh that had decided to be a sob at the last minute. My mother watched this exchange like a juror watching evidence she couldn't cross-examine. She took a breath and tried a different approach, one I'd never seen her use. People were moved, she conceded. It was as close to praise as she could get without rearranging furniture in her mind. Next time, she added as if there would be one and as if she could shape it, you might give me advance notice. Next time, I said, because I am kinder than she has earned and because I like the sound of those words too much to ruin them with a fight. The DJ took over. The dance floor filled. The room reset to something more familiar to my mother's design. I stepped back. I let the celebration be celebration. When the sparklers sputtered and the send-off photos were sufficiently magical, Cassandra grabbed me in the chaos and pulled me into the shadow of a column. Promise me something, she said. Don't disappear again. I promised. It felt like a vow I was ready to keep. My father found me last, the way he often does, on the edge of a room in the eddy of a current. I didn't know, he said, simple, and for once he didn't mean it as a defense. I didn't know how much was left in you, or how much we had taken from you by telling you what form it had to be. He held my face in his eyes for a long moment and then, in a voice misfit on a lawyer, said, I am proud of you, Audrey. It was ungainly and perfect. We stood there until someone needed him for a ride, and then he was gone in a swirl of tuxedo and logistics. The aftermath was strangely quiet. I sat alone at the piano once more, lid down, ruefully aware of the ridiculousness of feeling wistful about an object I had just spent hours wringing my heart through. A member of the catering staff approached with the careful bravery of people who have decided kindness is worth the risk of awkwardness. My sister filmed a bit, she said, eyes bright. We watched on break. We cried. I just wanted you to know. I nodded, too full to speak, and she, like everyone with good manners in a sacred place, left me to it. Driving home through a city that had decided to unclench, I didn't replay what I could have done differently. I replayed nothing. The silence in my car was a clean bowl. When I let myself into my apartment, the first thing I did was set the program card, the one with my name printed in a corner because they'd had to put it somewhere, on my coffee table. The second thing I did was plug in my digital piano and play just the last page of Return once, lightly. My body answered yes. Then I took a shower hot enough to melt expectation and slept harder than I had slept since I was 16. On Monday, my office had the audacity to be the same. My inbox had reproduced. The air smelled like toner and caffeine and deferred dreams. The spreadsheets waited, familiar and unthreatening. I should have been grateful. Instead, I was in that afterglow state where your real life makes the life you perform look like a paper set in terrible lighting. People asked about my weekend and I told them it was nice, because truth wouldn't fit in the message window. I answered auditors' questions with accuracy and zero poetry. At lunch, I sat outside with a Tupperware that tasted like duty and watched a pigeon with a limp boss 3 other pigeons around a dropped tortilla. It felt instructive. What felt real was the part after work, the grip of keys under my fingers, the way my shoulders lowered as if someone had peeled off a backpack I hadn't known I was wearing. I didn't practice for a purpose. I practiced because not practicing now felt like dishonesty. I rewrote a transition in Return that had always annoyed me, swapping one awkward modulation for a cleaner slide that felt like forgiveness. I started sketching a companion piece that began with the metronome's click and ended with it becoming a heartbeat. I called it Counter/Point and laughed at myself for being the kind of person who will make a pun out of 2 decades of therapy. On Wednesday, Patricia's email arrived. Short, sweet, devastatingly competent. Your playing at the wedding moved me. We have an Arts Foundation gala in October. Would you consider performing 2 pieces, ideally 1 original? Honorarium plus rehearsal time plus accompanist if needed. Let me know. I read it twice to make sure it didn't turn into a spam ad for ergonomic footrests. Then I forwarded it to Emma with too many exclamation points and she responded in all caps. Say yes before she changes her mind. I wrote back to Patricia that I would be honored. She replied within minutes with dates and a link to a performance agreement that somehow felt less terrifying than any accounting contract I'd ever reviewed. If you are still watching and you've ever had a night that rearranged your bones, hit like so this story finds more people who need it. And tell me in the comments, what did you come back to when you thought you were done? Subscribe if you want to follow this all the way to a stage with lights and an audience that paid to be there, because I think I am going to need company. Cassandra called from a beach where the sunset looked like money. Patricia says she's stealing you for the gala, she said, the sound of wind on the phone making the connection sound like a seashell. Also, Mom hasn't said a word about the wedding music since the thank you emails. She's stuck between being furious and wanting to brag. It's almost funny. Almost, I agreed. How's the trip? Beautiful, she said. We're talking about boring things on purpose. Like grocery lists and who wants to host Thanksgiving and whether old money has recipes for happiness or just better napkins. She paused. I'm happy, she added, and I believed her. When you get back, I said, come up to my place. I'll make pasta and play you the thing I wrote last night that might be something. Deal, she said. And Audrey. Yeah. Thank you. For showing up as yourself. It gave me permission to think about who I want to be married, not just who I'm supposed to be married. Therapy wasn't optional, it was air. I booked a session with a woman recommended by Emma, a therapist who had once been a violinist and didn't flinch when I described rage as the sound of a ruler on wood. She listened like a musician, head tipped, yes, but also with her shoulders and hands. You reclaimed a narrative, she said, not impressed, not dismissive. Now we make sure you don't hand it back the first time someone asks you to be small for their convenience. We talked about boundaries like they were instruments you have to tune daily. We talked about grief, not for what had happened but for what had been allowed to make a home in me. We talked about 16-year-old me like she was a person I could love instead of a failure I had to outrun. When we were done, she asked, "What will you do for practice this week?" Not scales. Practice. I said, say yes to the gala. Play every day. Write every day. Breathe when my mother texts. Good, she said. And write a letter to the girl who walked off that stage. You don't have to send it anywhere. 2 weeks after the wedding, my mother texted a photo. Me at the piano, head bowed, a halo of light the photographer swore wasn't a filter. The photographer included this, she wrote. It's nice. I could feel the effort in every letter not to say beautiful or proud. It used to make me mean that effort. It made me sad now in a way that felt like compassion on a good day and exhaustion on a bad one. Thank you, I wrote back. Lunch. 10 minutes later, yes. Neutral place, not her house, not mine. We chose a cafe with a chalkboard menu and small tables where words had to behave. She arrived early because of course she did, her lipstick a perfect shade that had never been invented in nature. You look well, she said, which in our family is an opening gambit that can slide either way. You do too, I said, and meant it because the lines around her eyes looked less like knives and more like maps. I spoke with Patricia, she said when the server left us with iced tea. She believes you should be playing publicly. She used the words, wasted in accounting. The corner of my mouth flicked. Patricia says what she thinks. She does, my mother agreed, squinting as if the sun had moved. She took a breath I recognized as the lead-in to a speech, then stopped mid-inhale. I wanted to humiliate you, she said, the words hitting the table like china and refusing to crack. At the wedding, when I said background, it was not unintentional. I thought, if I reminded you of your place, you would stay in it. She did not look at me when she said it. For a moment no one breathed. Someone at another table laughed in a way that sounded like relief. I know, I said, because it was the truth and because it was easier than pretending it had been an accident. And I'm sorry I wanted that, she added, too quickly to be rehearsed. Her nails were perfect. Her hands were not steady. I was so sure that pushing you would make you great, and when you left the stage at 16, I decided I'd been wrong about you. It was easier than being wrong about me. I had expected defensiveness. I had not expected this. It almost broke me, I said, voice quiet as a metronome at 40 BPM. I stopped because continuing would have been a different way of dying. She nodded once like someone accepting a verdict. I don't know how to undo that, she said. You can't, I said gently. We can decide what happens next. We sat. I told her about return in terms that didn't require her to understand harmony. She told me haltingly about a competition she had failed to enter because her father had forbidden it, and how she had spent years deciding whether being dutiful counted as love. We did not solve each other. We did not even forgive each other in some cinematic swell. But we exchanged the kind of honesty that makes room for later. Before we left, she reached into her bag and set a stack of old Shermer books on the table like a peace offering. I kept these, she said. I don't know why. I do, I said. Thank you. She stood, smoothed her skirt, and did a thing I had never seen her do with me. She waited to see if I would hug her first. I did. It was brief and awkward and holy. Gala prep was a new kind of oxygen. The hall was not huge, more salon than symphony, but the acoustics were intimate in a way that makes you comb your hair differently. The piano was a 9-foot grand that hummed under your hands like an animal learning your scent. I met the house tech who had the bedside manner of an ICU nurse, and the program coordinator who had a spreadsheet for everything including when to dim the sconces. We set a rehearsal time. I walked the aisles. I played the first and last page of Return to hear how the corners of the room would catch them. I added 2 short pieces to my set, both mine. One that began with a rhythmic figure like a heartbeat underwater, one that ended with a single note held long enough to teach people the patience to listen. The night of the gala, the room gleamed but did not glitter. Patrons in excellent fabrics who had learned to clap without smudging makeup found their seats. My father arrived early and pretended to study the program like it was a legal brief. Cassandra texted a photo from a rideshare. On our way, don't start before I get there. My mother arrived separate from my father in a dress that avoided the spotlight and sat 3 rows back, hands folded neatly in her lap like an apology waiting its turn. Emma slipped into the aisle seat and whispered, "Trip the power strip?" I squeezed her hand in thanks and told her to keep it as a souvenir. I didn't check my pulse backstage because I didn't need to. My hands already knew. When they announced my name, the sound felt like it belonged to someone I recognized and liked. I crossed the stage. I sat. I did not apologize to the audience for being there. I played. Return doesn't change, but people do. This time the room met it right away. The first movement landed on shoulders and was greeted like rain in a dry month. The second movement's turbulence did not frighten, it cleansed. You could see people's faces shift as if the music had moved their furniture an inch and improved their lives. The last movement did what it always does to me. It offered mercy without erasing memory. The applause was not polite. It was not gala applause. It was the kind people make when they recognize a thing trying to be true. I left the stage to a small crush of congratulations that felt like a warm tide. A man with ink stains on his fingers introduced himself as the owner of a bookstore that hosted quarterly concerts. A woman with hair the color of ambition asked if I'd ever considered writing for film. Patricia hugged me like a person who hadn't been trained not to. My father's ear was pink the way it gets when he cries and pretends he hasn't. My mother approached last, again because habits take time to break. "It was lovely," she said, and I almost laughed at the word, that hilarious, insufficient word. But I could see how hard she was trying to mean it. "It was more than that," I said softly to spare us both. "It was mine." On the train home, I had left my car because my hands were useless for anything but holding. My phone buzzed with messages from people I had not heard from in years. 2 were fellow students from those competition summers, both confessing to relief that I'd kept going after all. One was a text from my boss. "Saw a photo from the gala on LinkedIn. Congratulations. Would love to chat about how we can support your extracurriculars." I stared at the dots on the screen where new messages waited their turn and felt the oddest sensation. Not panic, not glee. Space. There was space in my life where there hadn't been. I didn't quit my job the next morning. I didn't set my cubicle on fire and flee in a cloak. I did something more terrifying. I emailed HR to ask about a part-time transition and remote flexibility options. I wrote it succinctly with the politeness I save for people who get to decide the shape of my weeks. Within an hour, I had a meeting invite. Within a week, we had a plan. 3 days in the office for a quarter, then reevaluate. I could already hear my mother's commentary and decided it didn't get a microphone. In the margins of those 3 days, my life bloomed. I took on my first student, Anita, 52, a software engineer who cried when she played the first 8 bars of Claire de Lune because her mother had loved it and grief had nowhere else to go. Teaching felt like hacking into a vault and handing people their own treasures. My second student was a 27-year-old pastry chef who kept bringing practice croissants and whose left hand had to learn to trust itself after years of piping cream with the right. Lessons ended with laughter or tears and always with someone standing up taller than they had sat down. It was not perfect, it was not fast. It was right. Business cards from the wedding became emails, became coffee, became dates on a calendar where my name wasn't relegated to a corner. The owner of the wood-smelling venue offered me a monthly slot. I went to look at the space on a Tuesday afternoon and ended up staying 3 hours listening to a jazz trio rehearse, feeling my muscles memorize the way a room loosens when the truth is being told in a minor. We booked the last Thursday of each month. I told Emma I wanted her to MC the first one and she said, "Only if I can roast your metronome." Cassandra kept showing up. She and Richard came to my apartment for pasta and heard the new piece that began with clicks and ended with breath. "Name it Ledger," she said, and we laughed until we realized we weren't joking. We talked about her job without my mother's filter on the call, and she admitted she didn't want to chase a title if it meant forgetting the part of her that liked making decks beautiful because beautiful things deserve competent administration. We planned a sisters-only weekend at the lake, not to be wistful but to be new. When she left that night, she hugged me for a long time and said, "This is the first time I can remember wanting what I have." As for my mother, she started doing a thing no one who knows her would recognize. When she wanted to advise me, she asked, "Hey, Sometimes I said yes. Sometimes I said not today. Sometimes she brought over old sheet music from the attic and sat at my digital piano and played a hymn so carefully you'd think the notes might scald her. One Sunday afternoon she looked up from the bench at me and said, "I was never as good as you," and instead of bracing for the arrow hidden in a compliment, I heard the confession and let it be a key. Weeks stacked into a season. The gala led to a shorter set at a museum opening where a child in light-up sneakers lay under the bench the way Cassandra used to and declared he could feel the sound in the floor. The bookstore concert ended with a Q&A, where an elderly man asked how to start again at 79 and I said, "The same way you start at 9, slowly and with delight." I wrote in the mornings, taught in the evenings, worked spreadsheets on the days that still required me to think in columns. My body learned a new rhythm. It looked suspiciously like a life. On a Tuesday so ordinary I can't remember the weather, my boss called me into a conference room and said, "I hear there's interest in a full-time performance calendar next quarter. Do you want to talk about what it would look like if you didn't come back after the pilot?" He didn't say it unkindly. He said it like someone offering you a beautifully wrapped package and giving you permission to open it later if you're not ready to ruin the bow. "I'd like to think about that," I said. "Good," he said. "I'd like you to think about it too." That night, after 2 lessons and a bowl of pasta eaten on the floor because chairs felt too formal for the conversation I was having with myself, I opened my laptop, drafted a resignation letter and saved it as a PDF named Someday. Then I opened a blank document and wrote a different letter, one that said, "I'm ready." I did not hit send. Not yet. I put both files in a folder called Decisions, closed the computer and put my hands on the piano because that is where the best answers live. I played the first phrase of return and felt the twitch in my fingers that means yes. I played the last phrase and felt the quiet in my chest that means stay. And then I closed the lid, stood in the doorway of my small, real living room with its stack of Schirmer books and its plant that had decided to thrive, and heard my phone buzz on the table. A new email. Subject line, album. It was from a small independent label whose producer had been at the museum opening. "Have you ever considered recording your original pieces? I think they'd like the world." I stared at the screen until the words blurred, then laughed out loud, alone in a room that was suddenly not big enough to hold what might be coming. I didn't answer right away. I walked to the window. I watched the city beneath me being its honest, imperfect self. Somewhere a person was drilling into concrete. Somewhere, a person was singing to a baby who wasn't sleepy yet. Somewhere, my mother was putting sheet music back into a box and not closing it all the way. When I returned to the table, I opened the email again, and for the first time in a long series of first times, I said yes before fear could audition its arguments. Then I plugged in my headphones, placed my hands on the keys, and started sketching the opening track. Something that begins like a room being unlocked and ends like a door left on the latch for whoever needs to come home late. Recording started in a studio small enough that the walls remembered names. The piano was a bright-lidded Hamburg that answered like a good friend. No flattery, just truth. The engineer, Layla, spoke fluent music in silence. "Take your time," she said and meant it. We tracked return first because that was the spine. On the third take, a bus hissed outside and we kept the take anyway. The faint sigh lives under the second movement now, a reminder that art shares a city with everything else. Between takes I wrote in the notebook my therapist asked me to keep. What the pieces felt like where my hands relaxed, where they braced. On page 3 I copied a single sentence. "Do not play to be forgiven. Play to tell the truth." Midway through the sessions I wrote the letter to my 16-year-old self. I kept it spare. "You did not quit," I wrote. "You exited a burning room. You are allowed to come back through a different door. I tucked it behind the music for the new track and felt my shoulders fall an inch. Word leaked the way the best rumors do, slowly and from people who don't gossip. 2 students became 6. The venue that smelled like would put my name on a chalkboard sandwich sign, and strangers walked in because chalkboards still matter. On a Tuesday, HR approved my part-time schedule early. On a Friday, I deleted the someday resignation letter and sent the other one. I expected drama. Work replied with exactly 2 sentences and a cake on my last day. The card said, "Thank you for the numbers. We'll be listening for the notes." I cried in the stairwell where no one pretends not to. If you've ever stood at a door you were afraid to open and pushed anyway, tap like so this finds someone rehearsing their courage tonight. And tell me below what you're returning to. I read these between takes. My mother and I adjusted in small clicks like a metronome learning a new tempo. She texted instead of instructing. She asked before advising. One afternoon she showed up at my apartment with something wrapped in tissue. Inside was the old wooden ruler. "I don't want this in my house anymore," she said. "I thought maybe you'd turn it into something else." I sanded the edge smooth and used it to stake my basil plant. When she saw it a week later, she laughed in a way that made both of us younger. "Good," she said. "Something living." On her next visit, she sat at my keyboard and asked if I would teach her a hymn with only 4 chords. We counted together out loud like beginners. When she missed, she didn't flinch. When she got it, she didn't look to me for approval. She looked at her own hands and smiled like a person who had finally been invited to her own life. Cassandra kept her promise to not let the perfect swallow the real. We spent a sister's weekend at the lake making an extravagant mess of pancakes and set the phone on the dock to record the water for a track intro. At night we lay on the rug and listened to mixes. "This one feels like walking home after deciding something," she said. I named the track Decision, Southbound. The album took shape. Return, ledger, counter/point, the door on the latch, southbound, and a closing piece called Amen That Isn't. We mastered on a Wednesday while rain practiced scales against the studio window. The label suggested fall for release. I suggested sooner. We compromised like adults who have learned to pick battles you get to keep. We set a date, booked the bookstore and the hall and the little room with the good wood. I ordered vinyl because I like the sound of a needle admitting it has weight. The release show sold out in an afternoon after Patricia sent one email and Emma posted a flyer with a caption that read, "We're done being background." My father arrived early and memorized seat numbers like a security guard. My mother chose the 4th row because it felt like respect, not surveillance. Before I went on, I found them together in the lobby looking at a blown-up childhood photo of me at a toy keyboard. "We didn't know," my father said again. "We're trying," my mother added, and for once neither sentence needed an argument to stand beside it. On stage I told the audience the only thing I knew for sure. These pieces are about what happens when you stop playing for permission and start playing for breath. I played Return and felt the room meet it like an old friend. I played Ledger and thought of everything I used to tally against myself. I played Amen That Isn't and left the last note ringing too long on purpose, because stops deserve ceremony. After, in the soft chaos of hugs and programs and pens, a teenage girl in a choir dress waited until the very end. "My mom wants me to keep competing," she said, eyes wet and furious. "I don't know if I love it or just love being good at it." I told her the truest thing I could offer. "You're allowed to find out." She nodded like a pact had been made and left with a little more room in her chest. At home around midnight I put the vinyl on and sat cross-legged on the floor. The first crackle, the first bell of sound. My apartment felt like the inside of an open hand. A message from Emma lit the screen. "Proud of you is too small." One from Cassandra. A photo of her at her desk, hair up, captioned, "I asked for fewer projects and got a better one." One from my mother. I listened twice. "I am learning to hear you." I didn't reply to any of them right away. I let the record run. I got up, checked the basil, touched the ruler stake and felt how smooth the edge had become. This is the part where an algorithm wants a bow, but my life doesn't have one. It has rehearsals and dinners on the floor and students who arrive on time because it matters to them. It has a mother who asks, "Hey, and sometimes remembers to wait for the answer. It has a sister who calls to say, "I said no today and didn't apologize." It has a father in the front row, ear pink, every single time. If any part of this helped you breathe differently, subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. A small tour, a second record, maybe a piece with strings if the quartet will say yes. Share this with the friend who needs permission to put their hands back on whatever they've been avoiding. And in the comments, tell me what you're reclaiming. Not so I can fix it, but so we can applaud when you do. Tonight before I sleep, I'll play the last page of Return once lightly and leave the door on the latch. If you need it, you'll know it's for you.